Yeah, well, I was waiting on sing song. See, if we pass it on one to the other.
You know, you should not reward him. That's right. That's right. You should punish him. See, Jim, that's at Harvard. That's at Harvard.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon.
Shall we sit down?
I'm Donna Nicely. I'm the director of the Nashville Public Library, and I'm here to welcome you. I'm also going to say welcome to the people that are throughout the library today. We've had such a turnout that we have television monitors all over the building, so to be sure that everyone can participate in this very important program. We're very glad you're here today. This weekend marks a very important date in Nashville's history, the 44th anniversary of the first organized lunch counter sit-ins, which is why we are commemorating the opening of the main library's new Civil Rights Room today. I can't begin to tell you how thrilled I am to have such a distinguished panel of civil rights leaders with us today to talk about the very events that are the focus of the Civil Rights Collection in the Civil Rights Room upstairs. Before we start the program, I would like to take a moment to recognize the individuals and organizations that are sponsors of today's program. The First Amendment Center, First Baptist Church, Capitol Hill, the Friends of the Nashville Public Library, the Nashville Public Library Foundation, and the William Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation at the University of Mississippi. Could we say thank you to those people? Thank you. There are two other very special people with us here today whom I'd like to recognize. The Civil Rights Room at the Nashville Public Library has been made possible through the generosity of Bill and Robin King.
Yes, yes, yes.
I think you will agree that their gift is significant to both Nashville and to the nation as a whole. And so we're so proud and happy that you've made this possible for us and for the city. We have some other special guests with us today and who would like to say a few words as well. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Nashville Mayor Bill Purcell.
Well, let me first thank Donna Nicely for all of the leadership that she's provided to make this day possible, to our Majority Leader and United States Senator Bill Frist, who is leading the delegation that includes our other Senator and former Governor Lamar Alexander, and quite a number of senators I know who will be mentioned later on, I'm sure, to my Congressman Jim Cooper and Congressman Lewis, together with the members of the Congress represented here today. My Vice Mayor Howard Gentry and other members of the council gathered here as well, to Governor Bredesen, whose dream this library was and whose dream has been fulfilled, I think you see, in this facility here today. It really is a great honor for me to have the opportunity to stand among you on the 44th anniversary of the Nashville sit-ins and welcome back to our city Congressman Lewis and Dr. Bevel and Dr. Lafayette and Reverend Lawson and Diane Nash and Reverend Vivian. As mayor, I am delighted that you would come home for this, the official opening of the Nashville Civil Rights Room, which really is a collection that vividly captures your contributions to our nation's greatest movement against racial segregation and inequality. It's an even greater honor to be able to relive Nashville's story in the civil rights movement with Senators Frist and Alexander, Congressman Lewis, and this great pilgrimage that they lead here. We were all together this morning, you need to know, at First Baptist Church, Capitol Hill. That church is first downtown building really was the training ground, among the most important training grounds for local civil rights activists, and First Baptist continues to be a strong voice in our city's social and moral conscience. Nashville is a different and much better place today because 44 years ago, the people on this stage and many others in this room stood up to hatred and hostility and boldly proclaimed that discrimination is wrong. The words of Dr. Martin Luther King, which are emblazoned in that magnificent civil rights room upstairs that the Kings have made possible, are, I think, among the most important words that have ever been expressed about Nashville, and probably among the most important words expressed about any city in America. And they are, quite simply, that in April of 1960, standing at Fisk University, he said, "I came to Nashville not to bring inspiration, but to gain inspiration from the great movement that has taken place in this community." He knew there was something special here, and I believe, as your mayor, that there is something special that lives on today. Nashville is a more vibrant and more diverse city. The segregated cafeterias that turned people of color away on this very site 44 years ago have been replaced by a public library that's open and welcoming to everyone. So today is a great day for Nashville. We are now very proud to sit together and hear and tell stories of pain and stories of suffering, stories of faith and stories of triumph, shared by many of the people in this room, because I hope and believe that we now understand that these lessons of our past moved us forward and will move us forward forever, and I hope ensure we will always be the place of inspiration that Dr. King declared us to be. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Mayor Purcell. And now I would like to invite Vice Mayor Howard Gentry, Jr. to say a few words.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to start by recognizing some members of the Metro Council who are here, a very important body of this government and very important to the future of this city as we move forward in all phases. Councilman Lutie Wallace, who has been a fighter over the years for civil rights. I think that Councilman Ronnie Greer is still here. Councilman Greer. Also, Councilman Gatto, I saw Jim Gatto in here earlier. Council Lady Carolyn Baldwin Tucker, who had to leave, councilperson at large. And also, I saw, or do see, the former Vice Mayor of Nashville, Ronnie Stein, whose family was very, very active in the civil rights movements over the years, and like to acknowledge him. And so I would also like to acknowledge Dr. James Hefner, the president of Tennessee State University, where I work, and it's very important, and also Forrest Harris, and John Maupin, presidents of American Baptist College, and also Meharry. Those acknowledgments I just wanted to do because a lot of you need to know who is here and who is supportive, and each person that I called benefits from what happened years ago to allow us to have the rights that we have today. I would also like to acknowledge my wife, Sharon Gentry, who is sitting, and my daughter. I would like to thank Ms. Nicely for inviting me to say a few words today. Today is a very special day indeed for all of Nashville as we commemorate the new Civil Rights Room here at the Nashville Public Library. This is a room that will forever remind us of the role that the people of Nashville played in the national effort to enlarge freedom for all people throughout the 50s and the 60s. This is also a very special and humbling day for me, though I was only 8 years old when the sit-in movement began in 1960. I was not old enough really to participate in the early lunch counter sit-ins, but I was old enough to realize that something very special was happening in our city, also in my life. As my parents were involved in transporting students from the area colleges to my church, First Baptist Church, Capitol Hill, I realized that something very special was happening when I witnessed the training in the basement of my church as I listened to the songs, "We Shall Overcome," Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around, and many, many others. And I later understood what that special something was. That ordinary person from all walks of life was rallying around a campaign to challenge age-old grievances. And what they were doing was, in fact, very American. They were lifting up their voices in the spirit of love and nonviolence to show the nation and the world that it was indeed time for a change. And so I quickly learned about people like James Bevel, the brother who would not be still, Bernard Lafayette, whose deep commitment was driven by religious faith, James Lawson, the teacher of the movement, John Lewis, who was always steadfast like the Rock of Ages, and C.T. Vivian, who was fiery but always focused. And finally, Diane Nash, that beautiful and fearless little lady who asked then Mayor Ben West the simple question, do you recommend that lunch counters be desegregated? Of course, the answer was yes. And of course, that was history. There were so many more who have not been mentioned, and I'm in awe today of the leadership that they brought not only to the Nashville Movement, but also to the civil rights movement in the Deep South. But I also learned that the Nashville Movement was successful not only due to their incredible leadership abilities, but also due to the people of the greater Nashville community who supported the cause. And at this time, I would like to ask all of the audience members who participated in the Nashville Movement, whether you were demonstrators or behind-the-scenes contributors, to please stand up at this point and be recognized. Would you all please stand? As I see my mother stand, and she's still standing, I applaud you and I honor you for your very hard work and for the risks that you took and the sacrifices that you made in order to help Nashville become a great city today for all people. Dr. Bevel, Dr. Lafayette, Reverend Lawson, Congressman Lewis, Ms. Nash, Reverend Vivian, welcome back to Nashville. And thank you for your commitment and contributions to helping make our fair city a place that is receptive and also welcoming to all people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Each of you and all of the people in the audience who were just recognized hold a very special place in the history of Nashville and the history of this nation. For it was your movement here that was so well planned and so successful that other leaders throughout the world have looked to Nashville as a model to follow for enlarging freedom through nonviolence. I am so excited that all of you could be here today for the commemoration of the library's new Civil Rights Room, a room that will function as a living history book for all of us and for our children and their children. Tennessean columnist Dwight Lewis probably summed it up best in a piece he wrote last week. He wrote that this weekend's events at the library would be history in the making, and that he hasn't been as excited about such a weekend since black people and white people joined together to dedicate the nation's first civil rights movement memorial in Montgomery, Alabama in 1989. Well, I haven't been this excited about an event in a long time either. And I feel honored and privileged and honestly overwhelmed to be here today in the presence of true American heroes. My heroes. I call you my godparents because I am a child of the movement. Thank you again, Ms. Nicely, for inviting me to be here today, and thank you all for joining us in this very special occasion. And above all, I want to again thank the heroes for the movement that you faithfully began and that we will never allow to die. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Gentry. United States Representative Jim Cooper, who represents the 5th District of Tennessee in our nation's capital, is with us today. Please welcome Congressman Cooper.
Thank There's a special spirit in Nashville that we need to treasure. The folks who stood up in this audience, the living civil rights heroes on this stage, embody that spirit of being able to solve our problems peacefully, sometimes even cheerfully, when other states and other cities failed to do it. We need to treasure that tradition. St. Francis once said, "Preach the Bible every day. Sometimes use words." People in Nashville, perhaps more than other cities, have lived their faith in a way that when you march, when you desegregate a lunch counter, people then understand what it means to turn the other cheek, what it means to love thy neighbor as thyself, what it really means to be a Christian. Whatever your faith tradition, that spirit of love for your fellow man is something we must treasure here. I want to single out a few folks who can't be with us today, but federal leaders of this city and this state in the 50s and 60s, men who were brave in their time. Estes Kefauver, Albert Gore Sr., who both refused both these men refused to sign the so-called Southern Manifesto when everybody else in the South just went along. Nashville's own congressman at the time, Dick Fulton, voted for the Civil Rights Acts of 1963 and 1964. That took real courage, but not like the real courage John Lewis showed, and Diane Nash showed, Dorothy Cotton and others who had to endure the hatred of some local people who would spit in their face or curse them or hit them or jail them just because these people were trying to live their faith. So it's indeed humbling to listen to their stories, and I hope we will carry them with us in our hearts for all the future generations. Thank you for letting me be here today.
Thank you, Congressman. Each year, Congressman John Lewis hosts a delegation of United States representatives on a tour of civil rights movement sites in the South as part of the Faith and Politics Institute based out of Washington, D.C. This year's Congressional Civil Rights Pilgrimage is being co-chaired by United States Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist, and their final stop on that tour is this very program. Please welcome Senator Bill Frist.
I want to thank you. The fundamental question I think that we should all ask over the next hour and a half is, where would we be as a community without actually the men and women who sit before you today? Where would we be without John Lewis or Reverend Lawson? Where would we be as a larger community, a county or a state? And indeed, I would ask, as Majority Leader of the United States Senate, where would we be as a nation? And I would take it one step further, where would the world be without those principles of nonviolence that were shaped right here in Nashville, Tennessee, as we will talk about, that were cultivated, that were applied to a movement that we do our best today to build on, those elected leaders both before you, but also my colleagues in the United States Senate. We stand on their shoulders. It puts a huge responsibility before us, but it's something that we will do, that we can do. It takes prayer, it takes participation, it takes tolerance, it takes understanding, it takes dialogue, it takes working together. And as a leader of this delegation, along with John Lewis, we pledge to do that. There have been 10 United States senators, that's 10% of the United States Senate, that have participated in a pilgrimage for the last 3 days with Bernard Lafayette, with John Lewis, with Dorothy, where's Dorothy? Dorothy Cotton. For the last 3 days, we have shared. We have broken bread together. We prayed together. We visited the sacred sites. And again, a pilgrimage is a visitation of sacred sites. And I would say that part of that pilgrimage is right here in this wonderful public library where we now have, because of the generosity of people like the Kings and this community, we have a sacred site. A pilgrimage is also a journey of moral significance, not just to relive, not just to experience, but a moral significance which suggests continuity and the unfinished business that is laid out before us as we look to the current generation, but also that next generation and the generation that follows. A number of United States senators, and I won't ask them all to stand, but Lamar Alexander, who is with us today, Secretary of U.S. Department of Labor Elaine Chao, who's been with us today, Senator Norm Coleman from the great state of Minnesota, who's with us today, Senator Mike DeWine, and Mike, you just might raise your hand today, who's with us, Senator from Ohio, obviously John Lewis, Senator Mitch McConnell from our neighboring state of Kentucky with us today. And the delegation goes on and on, 10 United States senators visiting these sites. Let me close and simply say that it's a learning experience, and most of you know that I'm from Nashville, grew up in Nashville, was very young when the events that we'll talk about today in the late 50s and very early 60s. But the remembrance of those, coupled with our experiences in both growing up and maturing and learning, lead us to a pilgrimage where we can honor those people who have died. So when we laid that wreath 2 days ago on the still water in Alabama, that is a challenge to us. We pay that respect, we pay that honor of those struggles in the past so that we can do our responsibilities today in a much more capable way. We seek wisdom, and that's why we will be listening here very carefully today. We've sought wisdom the last several days. With that, I pledge to continue to seek wisdom as we go forward to address those issues of equality and freedom and democracy, which aren't perfect, but we are on the way, standing on the shoulders of the great men and women who are with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Frist. And also with us today is the Governor of the state of Tennessee, Phil Bredesen. Governor Bredesen.
Thank you, Donna. We arrive at that part of the program where everything that needs to be said in introduction has been said, but one more person is up here to speak, and I want to simply chime in with the others and welcome all of you to Tennessee once again, and Congressman Lewis, to thank you especially for including Nashville in this annual pilgrimage. I hope very much you'll make this a regular part of the tour. I do remember, to the panelists who are here, having been here, I guess it's 8 years ago now, when we were all together with John Siegenthaler and some others down the street at the steps of the Metro Courthouse to commemorate the 35th anniversary of what you did to ignite the beginning. It was my first opportunity to meet many of you, and I want to thank you again myself for your commitment, your dedication, and your bravery. I'd also be remiss if I just didn't take 1 second and acknowledge John Siegenthaler here for the important role that he played. And to thank him for all he does, both personally and as the founder of the First Amendment Center. I look forward to the discussion today, to hearing about what people learned from the movement, and it really is my hope that those of us listening today would consider your commitment and dedication and figure how we can, in our own way, in the years ahead, make a difference. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Governor Bredesen. Now, please allow me to introduce our distinguished panelists, and then we will begin the program. Biographies for the panelists are included in your printed programs. Their individual and collective accomplishments are many. First, of course, Mr. John Siegenthaler, our moderator today, Reverend C.T. Vivian, Reverend James Lawson, Ms. Diane Nash, Georgia Congressman John Lewis, Dr. Bernard Lafayette, James Bevel.
He's on the way.
He's coming. His presence will be expected when he comes.
Yes. Does Bernard know that?
So I think it's time to begin our program, and John, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Donna. I said to Donna nicely when I came in today that I was so sorry she was not able to draw a crowd. I just should say that this is not only standing room only here, but elsewhere in this building. There are overflow rooms where people are participating, and I just add my welcome to those you've already heard. I think it'd be appropriate for just a moment, although many people in this building are here today who can remember it, I think it might be appropriate if I might just say a word about Nashville, the Nashville to which the members of this distinguished panel came to study and to learn. It was a city as segregated, as discriminating, and as divided by race as any place in South Africa at the heart of apartheid. And when I say that it was a segregated city, it was also a violently segregated city. Many of us in this city from time to time tell ourselves, oh, you know, we're not as bad as Birmingham. Atlanta was much worse. Montgomery was hell. Jackson, Mississippi was an awful place to go. And you know, we were just a little better in Nashville. And I just remind you that on the first night, Nashville desegregated its schools. One black child went to Hattie Cotton School, and that building was blown off its foundation.
That's right, 1957.
And I should also say, and they know so well the name Z. Alexander Luby, as many of you do. It was his courage and his advocacy of their rights that led his home to be blown off its foundation on the day of the crucial march, that march at which first C.T. Vivian sought to indict Ben West, and then Diane Nash asked him the operative question, is it morally right? So this city is a place we're proud of now. At that time, it was a place of shame. And this block on which this building is built has special meaning and relevance today, because on this block were places that were segregated, places they sought to visit, places that turned them away. And I would be at the corner at Candyland, and then go to Herschel's TikTok restaurant, and then the Crystal. Right here in the center was Lowe's Theater, which to be the target of a later demonstration. Across the street was Harvey's. Down on the corner of 5th was Kane Sloan. Tennessee Theater just across 7th Avenue. Those places were symbols of racial segregation. They epitomized the racism that existed in this city and all across the South. And it's the people who are here today and those who were with them there who changed our city, went on to change the South, many of them, and helped change the country. So thank you all for coming. I admire you. I always have. And it's great to be with you. Now,
it's mutual.
Thank you, Jim. Now, the last time I was together with them, John Lewis and Bernard Lafayette told me that Diane Nash most often spoke for them. Bernard said she was beautiful and she was my leader. And she is beautiful and she's still a leader. And I'll just begin with you, Diane. As you sit here today in this building, a building which was the target of the sit-ins, what's on your mind? How do you relate today to that time when you and the others risked life and limb to bring about change?
Well, John, I'm a lucky woman. I was at the right place at the right time. And Nashville was the right place. Actually, being back feels like home. Nashville played an extremely important part in my life. I'm from the south side of Chicago. And although Chicago was very segregated, we didn't have the signs that said white and colored. And as a result, I didn't even know I had been segregated, except on a few occasions. So when I came to Nashville as a student at Fisk, confronting the signs, although I had known segregation existed, it was the first time I experienced it emotionally. And I can recall after the first few weeks of being at school when the novelty had worn off, and I went downtown. The blacks who worked in the downtown area would frequently be sitting on the curb near the alley eating their lunch, because you could bring your lunch from home or you could get meals to go at the restaurants, but you just couldn't sit there and eat them. And of course, you couldn't be served at any lunch counters or restaurants. And movie theaters were segregated. So that was a period of my life where I really was excited about expanding my horizons, going new places, learning new things. And I experienced segregation as being very oppressive and very limiting. I really hated it. Very humiliating also. So I started looking for an organization or somebody who was trying to do something to combat segregation. And I asked so many students in my classes and in the cafeteria and in the dormitory if they knew of anything, any organizations that were trying to combat segregation. And so many people told me no, until finally Paul LaPrade told me that Jim Lawson was conducting workshops a short distance from
And Paul
campus.
LaPrade was a fellow student?
Yes, he was an exchange student at Fisk. So I started going to the workshops, and incidentally, I'd like to say right here that many of the things that you'll hear me say today as things I have learned from the nonviolent movement will be things that Jim Lawson taught directly, or the other people on the stage taught, because in working together as colleagues, I think we taught each other a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There are so many lessons that I learned, because being part of the movement was a life-changing experience. I guess one of the things that has impacted me most profoundly is the philosophy of nonviolence, because as a result of the things I learned in connection with that, I've led a very different kind of life than I would otherwise have led, and I like the life I'm leading and have led. And I'll just mention a couple of the things. The ideas of truth and love. I recall Jim saying in one of the workshops, seek first, the quotation, seek first the truth and the truth will set you free. And Gandhi wrote a great deal about truth and love. I remember being in jail in Rock Hill, South Carolina, especially, before I came back to Nashville. And he wrote something on the order of this. He said something like, we often say that God is love or God is truth, but truth is God and love is God. thought about that and thought about that. And about truth, I grew up a Catholic, and a lot was made of truth, but it was mainly be truthful, tell the truth, to be good. And I guess that's all right. But truth got much more meaningful to me when I realized that it gives you and people in your life accurate information upon which to make decisions and to act. For example, when scientists were trying to get to Mars, if every time they came upon a computation of 2 + 2, if instead of recording 4, sometimes they record 5, or 2 + 2 = 3, or 2 + 2 = 8, they never would have gotten to Mars. You can see that. And I think that kind of accounts for why, in many ways, in the natural sciences, we're in the space age. And in our social relationships, we're in primitive stages. Lying and being not truthful is institutionalized in our social relationships. Spouses lying to each other, significant others lying to each other, governments lie to the people, people lie to the government, cheat on our income tax, and what have you. Countries lie to countries. You've got the CIA and spy agencies whose job it is to lie, to go undercover, to pretend that, things are not as it is. And then we're surprised when our international relationships are difficult. So that's one of the really important things I learned, the importance of truth and the importance of love, and they need to work in tandem. And as a result of that, when I saw how powerful nonviolence could be, and how powerful, how it's possible to bring about change when you're truthful with people and when you genuinely love people, although that sounds corny now, and we don't hear it often. Love is a power that you can't really know until you use it. So after I saw that, I began to apply those principles in various areas of my life. And it really brought about like an odyssey of change. I applied those principles to myself as a black, as a woman, as an American, as a mother, in religion, in child rearing, in diet, just in major areas of my life. And since I had also learned that it's important to use your own brain, your own mind about things, and make your own decisions for your life, it really just caused me to lead a totally different kind of life than I otherwise would have led.
Could you say that when that you had come to that point when you began to go to workshops with Jim? Did those workshops help guide you down the path that you just described?
They were the foundation for that. I hadn't come to that at all before that. I was just on a normal path.
Did you have any idea where he was taking you all when you sat down with him in those workshops?
I didn't know where I was taking myself.
Not a clue. And in fact, there were several times when I found myself in jail when I said to myself, that Jim Lawson. But there were other times when I...
Well, let me go to, for a moment to Jim. And if you could sort of give us how the strategy evolved. I mean, you just said, I didn't know myself, and I'm sure that's true. But if anybody in this crowd knew, you had a sense of where you'd like to take it. And I'm wondering how much of the vision was there when they began to come together. I mean, we know that John has written, you know, there were some in the group who weren't sure they wanted to go or didn't want to go, and some just said, I'll go and try it out. And there was something magnetic about it that kept them coming back. But talk a little bit about what your vision was and how you communicated it to them and how it finally evolved into dynamic and dramatic and powerful action.
Well, the Nashville Christian Leadership Council, CT, and Kelly Miller Smith and Andrew White and a number of others simply were impressed by the fact that we needed to do something in Nashville. We did not know what that was, but we followed a nonviolent methodology by sitting down for several weeks in 1959 on a Saturday morning for 3 hours and talking about all the problems that Negroes faced in Nashville. And we just sort of brainstormed and analyzed them without putting any value on any one of them as most important or least important. And out of that then came the decision where we will begin by desegregating downtown Nashville. Now, since no one had done that in Birmingham or Atlanta or Washington, D.C., we really didn't have any models. I knew of sit-ins in Chicago and Cleveland and Los Angeles, which I had read about in the early 1940s as a technique for opening up restaurants and hotels and skating rinks and theaters and whatnot. So I had read that material. I learned, I knew some of the people who were involved, like Jim Farmer and Bayard Rustin and George Hauser and a number of others. I read some of that literature that was being published then in the mid and late 40s. But this had never been tried in a thoroughly segregated city. So that meant it again was a new ball game. But I think that one was I was absolutely convinced that the Montgomery bus boycott was not an accident. That what had happened in India with nonviolence and Gandhi and the creating a new country out of former colonialism was not an accident. And Gandhi, of course, taught me a great deal in the 40s and 50s and since on the methodology of the science of nonviolent struggle, which came of age in the 20th century. So I was absolutely convinced. I knew how trying to abide by love and compassion and care, that even my enemy being a human being, precious in the sight of God as I was, I knew how that had changed my whole outlook on life as a boy, as a young person, as a college student, and so forth. So I was convinced of that. C.T. and Kelly Miller and others were persuaded it could happen.
Kelly Miller Smith being the pastor of First Baptist.
At that time, the pastor of First Baptist and the president of the Nashville Christian Leadership Council. Yeah. So we had that context. The second component, I think, is the fact that we knew that segregation and all that it represented was wrong. I don't know of anything that is more disastrous for the spirituality of this country or the spirituality of Nashville than have signs over drinking fountains white colored or restrooms saying white gentlemen, white ladies colored. I mean, I can't think of anything that teaches us more in denial of ourselves, of we being human beings, than those signs. But it was true that no one had started out working like that. And as we talked and trained and did role-playing, as we made tests in various places. And I didn't do my first sitting in Nashville. I did my first sit-ins in my hometown in Massillon, Ohio. And also by myself as I traveled, and would sit at a lunch counter someplace. Indianapolis was a place that this happened several times to me. And I would go ahead and sit there for a couple hours and talk to the manager or somebody else and try to see if I could not persuade them to there was no law. This was custom. I had done some training in that sense of myself. But did we have a larger vision? No, we did have a vision that we ourselves could try to become like what we wanted the city to become. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Central Committee in our movement, we try to treat each other as equals. Diane was actually our first chairperson of the Central Committee because we said that was a good way of demonstrating what we were trying to become. And we made corporate decisions right. By consensus. Right. We were sometimes up all night working on it, and we'd have arguments and all the rest of it. But then we would, because we were committed to the task we had adopted and also committed to the notion that there is a way to do it and do it with power and truth, we would come to a place where we had large consensus over and over again, so that many of the things that did happen did not come from any one person's mind. It came from a process of a community where a decision was made after thrashing it out in so many different ways, but knowing that this was something that we could accomplish. Now the larger vision came later. I do now have a notion of what a beloved city like Nashville can become. I do have now a larger vision, but that's a consequence of working and living through the movement in 60, 61, 65, 68, 69, 72. So that's all hindsight. But I do have a notion now of a vision of what the beloved community might look like politically. I don't have all the details in my head, but I do have some general notions of what that would look like. For an example, I think that an open, loving community, compassionate community would be one where, and I gained this in the 60s, where any mature, responsible adult could marry any other mature, responsible adult without the society saying you can't do it. I see that as one of the principles of a society that's really compassionate and democratic and just. Yeah.
Let me ask you, the larger vision was not there. Yeah. Was there a sense that as the strategy unfolded, was there a sense that these young students who were caught up in the dynamic, was there a sense that you were guiding them toward what might be a life-changing circumstance for the city, but also might be life-threatening to them, and that it was not only going to be dangerous, but also well might result in their imprisonment and result in police records?
Oh yes, but they can all answer this better than me. I clearly knew. I'd been in jail already myself, so I knew full well that to develop a movement that getting hurt, getting beaten up, dying, going to jail was definitely on the platform, on the stage, on the horizon. So we did try in our workshops to have role playing and drama playing to help people see the possibilities that that injury was possible. I remember one of the things I did very early on, maybe the very first night, and on occasion after that, was to pair people up 2 by 2 and give them an incident where one of them was going to act out slapping the other one or accosting the other one. and the other one was try to respond. Any of you all remember that? That's a favorite one of mine for new workshop people to try to expose them to the notion. And these things happen because by this time I knew, for an example, of Martin King having been slapped in the street of Atlanta at age 11. And I knew how I had been accosted, not violently, but with slurs and hostility on the street as a 4-year-old and 5-year-old and 7-year-old in Massillon, Ohio. So I knew this was something that could happen. So we would dramatize that. So we did have that.
Well, let me go to the Congressman. John Lewis, been walking with the wind. You talk about how your spirit was really consumed by those workshops and by the possibility to bring about change. And you're right about that day when you and Jim Bevel at the Crystal, just a few blocks away, thought you were facing death for a few moments. So that our audience can really get a sense of what it was to move from the workshop into the street, into the restaurants. Could you just go back for a little bit and talk about your own transformation as you moved from someone who was going to be a preacher to someone who was perhaps going to lose his life trying to change the community?
Well, John, I grew up in rural Alabama, and I came to Nashville in September 1957 at the age of 17. I had seen segregation and racial discrimination. I had seen the signs that said white men, white women, colored women. I had heard the voice of Martin Luther King Jr. on old radio, and I was inspired by the words of Dr. King. And a year or so later, I met him. But coming to Nashville, wonderful city. I fell in love with this city. It's a wonderful place. My first time living in an urban center. But I didn't like segregation. I didn't like racial discrimination, and I wanted to do something about it, but I didn't know what to do. Jim Lawson, this man, and I don't think he's taking the credit that he should. He's too modest. He became our teacher. He said, well, maybe in his own mind, he didn't have a blueprint or roadmap. But I think I knew he was taking us someplace. In those early days, we didn't talk about sitting in at a lunch counter inside of a restaurant or standing up at a theater. Jim, you must recall that you told us about the basic principles of all of the great religions of the world. Do you recall that?
Oh, yes, sure.
And you taught us about what Gandhi attempted to do in South Africa, what he accomplished in India. And then one day, somehow, some way, after the road, I was very quiet. Diane would tell you. Jim Lawson would tell you. CT. And Bruno, I was very quiet. I didn't talk a great deal. And some people would say, what should we do? And Diane would tell you, I would say, we need to dramatize the issue. Okay. And as some people in the old movement would always say to me, dramatize. We need to dramatize the issue. But I mean, we needed to go on a sit-in. We needed to do something. When I was growing up, my mother always told me, don't get in the way. Don't get in the way. Don't get in trouble. But when I came to Nashville, I got in the way. I got in trouble. And Jim Lawson, perhaps more than any person, was responsible for me getting in the way and getting in trouble. And I grew up. I literally grew up. You come downtown, sitting there at a segregated lunch counter, and some reporter like David Hammerstein come by and say, why are you sitting here? Somebody with a microphone come by and say, what? You have to respond. And Diana appointed us and made us captain. What you call it, Diana? Leaders of the same group? And you had to be spokesperson, that's right. We were spokesperson. You had to be able to speak. So I grew up while I was sitting down on those lunch counter stools. And I tell you, the first time I got arrested here was on February the 27th, Saturday, February the 27th, 1960. That changed my life. I felt free. I felt liberated. I felt like I had crossed over.
That's it, Doc. That's it. Now, let me just, you felt liberated in chains. You felt liberated behind bars. I mean, that is a contradiction in terms that many of us
it may sound like
never
that, but I tell you.
Yeah, so help us understand just what that means.
Well, John, I must tell you, this thing became like a crusade. When we left First Baptist Church, we had different young people from all of the schools, from American Baptist, from Fisk, Tennessee State, Vanderbilt, Peabody, Meharry. Am I leaving out in the schools? And there was people who would sing. They just sing, and they would make that church, Old First Baptist, rock. They would start singing, amen, amen. You remember that? And when they stopped singing, we were ready to march. We were ready to come downtown, occupy those lunch counter stools, or go and sit in someplace, whether it was Woolworth, Walgreens, McClellan, Kresge's, Movement Graphic Drugstore, Candyland, Crystal Weather. And when you got arrested, you were thrown in a wagon with your colleagues. And it was okay. Jim Lawson prepared us for it.
The date lines were February 13th was the first sit-in here in Nashville, though we did testing of places in November
and
of
December
59. Yeah, we did November and December, that's right. Then the first arrest here in our movement was February 27th, which was a Saturday.
I'd like to dwell on the movement, not just because it's so meaningful to history, but also people of another younger generation have no sense of what this was really about. You all were frequently assaulted. You were frequently verbally abused. Some of you were thrown over the counters. Most people have seen those videos of how the assaults came at the lunch counters. There's one of somebody being thrown over, another having a cigarette burn their head. I mean, it was real punishment. And the assaulters went free, and you went to jail, and you felt liberated. But you know, it connotes the spiritual thrust, I think, of what you all were about.
That's right.
But John, we felt free. You'd be sitting there in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion, waiting to be served. Sometimes we would be looking straight ahead. Some of the young people would be doing their homework, and someone would come up and spit on you, or pour hot water, or hot coffee. Put a lighted cigarette out in your hair or down your back, or pull you off the lunch counter stool, and you get back up and you try to occupy that seat again. To me, we were prepared. Jim, we went through what we call role playing, social drama.
Sure.
I remember Bernard trying to be so fast, so smart, and would take a cigarette, and I didn't smoke, and he didn't smoke, but he would light a cigarette and blow smoke. And Reverend Anderson did it.
Alexander Anderson.
You're talking about in the workshop.
In the workshop, yeah. And a black person would play the role of a white person, and a white person would play the role of a black person, the opposition. Yeah. But the people were so disciplined. And that's why when Martin Luther King Jr. would come here, and I remember the time he came here, and he said the Nashville Movement had a better understanding of the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence than any other movement. And it was because of this one man, Jim Lawson.
Bernard, there is a scene in one of those videos in which you, as a very young student, are sitting, I think, with John, maybe with Jim Bevel, maybe with Marion, I don't know, maybe with Marion Barry. I don't remember everyone in that scene except I remember you. And you're reading a letter from home. And your parents are saying, don't do this. Stay away from this. And I know your experience was shared by many other students who were participating in that. But would you talk about how it was at home? While you were here, your name was getting in the paper, your name was going on the police blotter. They were worried about, will you be able to graduate? Will you be able to get a job? Will you be able to preach with a police record? Those concerns were there. And I remember at the end, I guess it was maybe your mom who wrote, you said, she just doesn't understand. And that's always been a touching moment for me as I've studied what you all did. But talk a little bit about how parents reacted to this revolutionary idea this man of vision had put in your head.
Mm-hmm. Yes, John, that was an important experience for me because I was the first one in my family who ever went to college. Mm-hmm. And so a lot was riding on that because people, had 6 other siblings behind me, and as well as the community. And so I was like, when they sent me off to college, my church packed a box, like canned goods and all kind of things like that, washcloths. And, this was the church. They took a big collection, and some people, brought sardines. And
when you're from Florida, you would bring seafood.
Right. Okay. And potted meat, and Vienna sausage. So this was, what they used when they traveled, because they couldn't eat at places. Okay? That's right. So we caught the train and came on up here, and I had a whole box of groceries. And I felt, to be honest with you, that, well, these are my people I grew up with, and they're, not as, maybe sophisticated about what you need when you go to college. And guess what?
You needed it.
I arrived a week early, and the lunchroom was not open. And American Baptist College was in rural North Nashville.
East Nashville. East Nashville.
East Nashville. East Nashville. North of town. Mm. So, you see, that's the whole thing. Sometimes God works through people ignoring you with your smart self. Yeah. So here I was, and my parents were very much concerned, my mother. My father was cool. He supported me, but he never said anything to my mother. That's how I learned from my daddy. So he always just gave me the nod, In fact, they used to call him Naughty, Bernardi. Naughty, okay? All right? So I got this letter when she heard I was involved in sit-ins. It was my mother mainly, and she sat down and carefully wrote out this letter. And she had a very interesting strategy for dealing with me. I don't know if it was true with the other kids or not, but negative inspiration. She knew that if she told me that I couldn't do it, I'd do it. Like she told me I'd never finish college. She said, no, you'd rather go around aggravating white people. Sent you to college, no, you won't stay in class, You downtown aggravating white people. You're not getting a lesson, That's what the letter was all about. And it was kind of disturbing, but in the back of my mind, I knew that, she really wanted me to succeed. So it was out of, you mentioned something about Harvard University. When I did go back to school, I went back to try to get me as much education as possible, as quickly as possible. I finished all this stuff in 4 years. Undergraduate, master's, and doctorate. 4 years. Okay? And I took those papers and gave them to her. So, that is another notion of freedom. Okay? And that's one of the reasons why students were able to get involved, because we were free from our parents, most of us, except Matthew Walker, you know. You know, he's right here in Nashville, so he had to deal with that. But he had supportive parents, which is good. I thought about you with the question you were asking, John. I just want to comment on that, if you don't mind, for a moment. Freedom. What is the meaning of freedom? When you think about it, we went through the Emancipation Proclamation, and then we went through Reconstruction. We were free, and then we were not free. Okay, so how do you know when you are free? Well, the thing that came to my mind was, number one, there's such a thing as physical freedom with no bars and no chains. Physical freedom. That's one notion of freedom. The other is legal freedom, where the law says that you are free. Because the law said we were not free. Segregation laws. You're not free to do certain things. You're limited. The law says that. That's legal freedom. Okay? Then there's also a social freedom, where the law says that, yes, you are free, but then you're not accepted by society, like Jim was talking about. And I think Dan was talking about that in terms of Chicago. There were no signs, but you would just know that you weren't free to do certain things. Exactly. The law didn't say that you couldn't do it, but society, the way they treated you. So that's social freedom, you know. The other is psychological. And I think that these other freedoms, all right, are all dependent, you see what I'm talking, and impact the psychological freedom. Because you can say the law, you can take away even society, people will accept you, and then still the scars are there. And Martin Luther King says it takes longer for those scars to heal. And that's what we're dealing with in terms of our children. That's why we have so many young people locked up in jail, because psychologically they've been scarred. They don't even know. It's invisible scars. They don't even know. They don't even understand. And so the whole notion of define your parents, and that was one of the things. Now, we kept most of these young people, high school students, out of the movement, except Cordell Regan. You know, he's from Nashville, and Joy's brother, following him, and it was hard. And there was a couple of other ones. Lewis, what was that fellow named? Yeah. Lewis? Lewis Miller. I was trying to think of his name. He's another little one running around.
Still at it too, Doctor.
It was very hard, you know, to keep them out of it, because they were defiant in a sense, because they wanted to be free.
That's the point.
So what is it? Is it? I think the freedom comes first on the inside, that you have to want to be free, and then maybe John Lewis. That's what freedom ultimately is. Even if you haven't achieved it, there is a kind of freedom that you have to want to be free, and I think that's what John experienced coming from Troy, Alabama. You know, that urge that was there all the time, and what he found was opportunity in Nashville. So what I wanted to basically say is that those psychological barriers are always impacted by the other kind of restrictions that we have. But you know what the greatest restriction we have? Fear. The overcoming, that we shall overcome part. The most important verse is that we say we are not afraid. What we're saying is we don't want to be scared. You know? And if we can overcome that, that then is a liberating kind of expression.
You know, the last time Dr. King spoke in Nashville, he was at Vanderbilt, and he said, as part of a most eloquent address, he said, to those of you who are white, who would like to support us, but because of social pressures, or economic pressures, or political pressures cannot, we will liberate you.
Yeah. That's
and
right.
with your help, he did. Let me move quickly through what was an evolving strategy. The citizens are there. They are consistent. They are making news. They are making the city angry. They're making the city thoughtful. They're making the city at first resistant. And Easter time is coming. And a new strategy evolves. Economic withdrawal. As I recall, Dr. Vivian Henderson came up with later the numbers that downtown Nashville lost during the period leading into Easter for the economic withdrawal. Jim, I take it that this was the next step. The sit-ins have created pressure now, will raise the level of pressure. And then, as we're nearing Easter, some merchant of violence, some person who would kill dynamites Mr. Luby's home, and the next day there is what the press has described as the silent march. And Mayor West comes out to meet you all there on the plaza, and C.T. Vivian has an indictment of the mayor. And you read it to him. Sort of recount, if you could just give me some sense of what went into the planning of that march, and the strategy to hit him with what amounted to a 1-2 punch. You indicted him, and then Diane gave him the chance to get a pardon.
Well, if we're just going to start there, it's kind of simple.
Start wherever you want to.
All right. See, and this is what is important, is that when we start talking about freedom, is the freedom is the ability and chance to act. That's when you're free. That's why it doesn't matter whether you're in jail or not, all right? Is because if you've acted, you can be free, all right? If you don't act on nothing, you will not be free. I don't care whether you're black or white. And the great white problem is passivity. Is that they're passive because they're afraid of what other white people might do. As soon as they can get beyond that, they too can be free. All right? So we were, both of us here in the Southland, in particular, I'll give you the other piece of it, right? But in particular, none of us were free in this country. All right? Is that Diane and I came from Illinois. There weren't any laws. There isn't a time in my life when I have not, I mean, since I was a kid, a little kid, right? That I was not trying to find a way to liberate black people. Not just me, right? Because I live with the whole community of black people. In my town, it was a small community. I said the whole community. It's not Chicago, right? But the thing is that although I was liked, because they pick out one or two, you know, I mean, because you're nice and we like the way you smile and you're light and you look better, and you know, you're the exception. See, so the thing is that oh, that's part of it, right? And somebody gives you a little passport because they like you, right? And you're all right, but that doesn't help you because you know that nobody else is that is like you, right? Is that, and as a result of that, you see how the system works. It's supposed to cut you off from, so that you, and in fact, and you're at your worst when you come to the point of saying, if the rest of them were like me. See, if you ever get there, you see. And what I was learning, because I was, you know, kind of like, liked at that point, not liked, right? What I learned about that is that most people are decent and you can win them if you try, right? And from the time I was a kid, I would talk to people, I would say hello to people 3 times, right? The first time they look at me, it was a black kid, you know, they call him speaking to me, right? Now we're in Illinois, right? Up south. All right?
Up south,
see,
that's right.
But what I learned is if you are persistent, right, is that people will begin to respond to you, right? And that becomes very important. But the thing is that there was never a time. What I had to learn here more than any other thing was how deeply entrenched the church was in allowing it to happen, keeping it going, and giving white persons an excuse for it, right? All right? That's the point, right? Is that was supposed to be the freeing was in fact the destroyer of, all right? And so that, and I represented the Christian church, because that's where I found my freedom in the black community, was in the black church. That's where we found our freedom, period. Because we knew, and my great-great-grandparents, I grew up with 4 generations of my family, right? Back into slavery, right? And you know what they used to sing in slavery? Everybody talking about heaven ain't going there, all right? Point being is that we knew that most white people had too much hate in them to satisfy God, right? All right? And we knew if you didn't satisfy God, you could forget it, right? I don't care how many crosses you hung around your neck, how many you put on the back of the thing, how big a church you built, right? You weren't about it. That gave me a sense of freedom because I knew I was right. That's that internal thing you're talking about, right? Once you know you're right and the other person is wrong, you're free, they are not, and you know it, right? All right? Yeah. And you know it, right? You also know that your central role then, and we couldn't say it because, you see, you're jailed in, as you said, without cufflinks, right? Is that cufflinks? But those can be, those can put you in jail. But the thing is, you knew, right, that your main job was to convert white people. Now the thing is, I was doing that all my life, trying to convert white people by being nice, by that speaking, huh? By doing everything I could to let them know that all black people weren't like they were, like they thought they were. You understand my point? Is that all of that was being nice. That didn't do any good. Huh? On an individual basis, but that wasn't the issue. The issue for me was always for all of us. All right? How do you get rid of this thing? Right? Now, you see, so that every time you had an opportunity to move beyond, you did it. Is that when I came here, I'd opened lunch counters in Peoria, Illinois, before coming here, like Jim, right, was talking about in Massillon, Ohio, right? We had opened lunch counters and that sort of thing there. There wasn't any law in Illinois that said it, but tradition, mores, custom.
Racism is normalcy.
Yeah, that's right, right? And when you realize that, you know that you've got to break through it at every level. And the thing that became important was that the thing that became important that I learned here, that nicety not only was not going to do it, but that you had to be involved in breaking down the very systems of racism, right? And that when the time it could come that and that you had to break down all forms of violence. And the first thing you had to do in breaking the forms of violence is to stand up to it, all right? Because as long as it can threaten you and you are willing to fall back, you're your own slave. You're involved in your own degradation, all right? I wasn't going to be involved in my own degradation, all right? The thing is that if they beat me, so they beat me, all right? That's what my faith had already taught me. As Paul said, I bear the marks of the Lord Jesus on my own body. When I was beaten in jail and I came back to Atlanta, I said I bear the marks. I was happy. Right? Is that because out of that comes true freedom. Comes then the next step. Here we were standing in front of this mayor, right? Who, jolly good fellow well met and all that. But you see, what he was is a carrier of the virus of racism. What he was the front man for a system that was destroying people by the hundreds of thousands. Right? What he was a representative of a legal system that was so destructive that nobody in the South could admit it. That's how destructive it was, right? Is that, and so that the politicians were elected by those who got in the pulpit. In fact, the Southern Baptist Convention decided who the governors were, right? In fact, on TV this morning, this was a police state, right? Is that you and Habersham was on this morning. Remember, Habersham was talking about it was a soft police state. There wasn't nothing soft about it if you were black. All right? All right? It was a police state. Now, the point being is that you can't break that until you face its representatives. And when you face its representatives, you don't grin and shuffle and look down and talk niggerish, all right? You tell them what you really think, all right? And what you really feel. And if it takes your finger, you do that too, all right? All right? The point being is you lay it out, right? Now, you know, as Paul, you're telling the truth in love, but you're not so loving that you're bending over backwards, all right? You're talking about a kind of love that can free people. That's the love you're talking about. You're talking about a kind of love that's going to get rid of this evil. That's what you're talking about. See, we don't even call it evil, right? It was a sin, right? We talk about what's our relationships. No, our relationships, we didn't have any relationships. They were built upon evil. If you're evil, you don't have any relationships with somebody that you can't respect as a full human being, all right? That was the issue. When you have a chance to face radical evil, you do it with radical love. You do not do it with, with soft peddling stuff, right? It's just like right now, right? All over this country, people are suffering. That shouldn't have to because the government is not doing what they should do. Are we supposed to be nice about that? Are we supposed to be nice about that? Now, is that, so that is what it was about, right? Well, see, the man personally has enough, Mayor, personally had enough integrity and enough real religion to know what I was talking about, right? When he was looking out, he was thinking about, but can I say it?
First thing he said to you was, I desegregated the airport, and you said, I don't want to go all the way to the airport to get a sandwich.
Precisely. In fact, let me tell you the other thing. He didn't do that. The federal government did that.
And you told him that.
Exactly right. He didn't do that. All right. Federal government did that. In fact, Martin King and Abernathy and the group in Montgomery used to go out to the airport in order to discuss the issues at a place that they could eat, without all the stuff, because the federal government had said, and you know what it was based on? It's based on tax money, not their hearts. All right? It was not something they wanted to do, it's something they had to do in order to. Is that, see, these are the kinds of things that made a difference. Now, you can buy a half-truth if you want to, all right? See, and this is the game that's always played. This is why the first rules is we've got to know the subject we're dealing with. This is why I could come back at him, right? We were prepared to know the field we were talking about. The more you know, the less of a slave you are. Is that that's the thing that makes a difference. Now, that's what it really was when Diane stepped up and asked him that very personal question, right? We prepared it, right? But was he going to how was he going to respond, right? Because what he was really deciding was, am I going to remain mayor of this town? What he was really deciding was, have black activities so soften this town and cause them to think, as you say, that's the other thing that happened, right? People were thinking all over the city, right? White people who started out mad as the devil ended up thoughtful beyond our concern. Because the basic belief is that most people are good and they don't want to be involved in something that hurts people. But you've got to act in the street long enough for them to go through that process, all right? And he said yes. And when he said yes, right, He was plumbing the depth of this city, not just us. He knew what we wanted, right? And then within a couple of weeks, it started 2 or 3 weeks. By 3 weeks, it was open, wasn't it?
This was April 19th.
Weren't there the test period where, John, where you all would go in and...
May 10th.
Yeah,
was the
May
first
10th, where there was a test period in which...
Because I tried to keep people not to say it's a trial, not to say it's a test, because there was no going back.
That's right.
We insisted it was a process whereby it could happen quietly and under preparation and should go forward. That was the whole idea. But I have been wanting to add to the fact, John, and what you raised, and that is that we heard the bombing. I don't remember hearing it. Diane does. We already had a Central Committee meeting scheduled that morning at 6. This happened before 6. And so we went on to that meeting and decided to do this silent march. Could be quiet talking, but no singing, no clapping, no slogans. The quiet.
Am I wrong? Is that march headed toward downtown?
Yes. Yeah.
Were there not people joining along the way?
Oh,
I mean, the adult community that once had worried about where it was going to lead.
Yeah.
By this time, there is massive community support.
Yes.
Not only for the economic withdrawal.
But John, even before then, we had many mass meetings.
Mass meetings.
All over the city. And the African-American community
was together.
Supported it.
These were full meetings. These were standing room only meetings oftentimes.
And even CT and Jim and Diane and Bernard must recall, when we didn't call it a boycott, we called it economic withdrawal. And it's not just in the African-American community, but many white people, white citizens, especially women. There was a group of women in the city.
Church Women United.
Church Women United. Came downtown and turned in their shopping plates at King Sloan and at Harvest Department Store to show their support for the movement. Yeah. So it's not just those of us that were sitting in, or those of us that was marching, but there were people of goodwill throughout the city that were putting their body on the line in a different way. And there were roles for people to play.
And I want to add, I want to put in the fact that the Central Committee selected CT and Diane to be the spokespeople that when we hit the thing, and hit the City Hall. And I can't remember who did the telegram, but we called for a telegram rushing to Ben West to say, we want to meet you there.
Right.
So that was all part of the strategy.
A part of that strategy, though, we have to see at the very beginning, because I don't want Bernard to have to pick his own stuff up, right? But Bernard went out, and one of the other guys with him went out to Tennessee A&I.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And got that campus ready. That's where we started.
We rushed immediately from that brief meeting where we were of one mind.
And Diane, am I wrong? You heard the blast that morning.
Yes, because we had that 6 a.m. meeting scheduled. Yeah. I was up and I was getting dressed to go to the meeting, and I heard this big boom. I had no idea what it was, of course, but a few minutes later I learned. And so that's how promptly we were about to have the meeting after the bombing. You know,
I was promised at the outset that I would let you all ask some questions, and I got carried away myself, and we're about to, I'm about to take away their supper time. But at any rate, I do want to give some of you an opportunity. If there's somebody in the audience, and there are a lot of people in the audience who want to ask questions.
John, I want to add something really
I'm going to be selective, and I'm going to go right here, and then I'm going to go back there, and then down here, and that'll be 3 questions, and we'll see where we are. And I ask you, please, to direct your questions, and after the questions, I'm going to come back and give each member of the panel a chance to summarize. Am I missing?
Oh, I just wanted to add one quick thing.
Sure, please do.
About the issue of being in jail, causing you to feel free. I remember one night, Jim was in one of the workshops. He was preparing us to go to jail. He was talking about what you could do while you were in jail to keep from being demoralized and things like that. And I must have asked him 3 or 4 questions what I really wanted him to tell me was that it would be all right, you know. and of course he couldn't. And I was so afraid of jail. I couldn't imagine myself in jail. The thought of me in jail was just a darkness that I couldn't see through, you know. And after the workshop that night, I remember telling people, well, I type pretty well, and so I'll do any typing and making leaflets and stuff. And I'll make phone calls, but I'm not going to jail. And I meant it. And, you know, a few weeks later, the occasion came and I did go. And that was a real freedom.
That's right.
Because sometimes the road to liberation leads through the jailhouse. And if you're afraid to go in the jailhouse, then you can't get to freedom. So having the experience, I'm going to quote Jim again one time. He said, most of us recognize that we can think our way into new ways of acting, but you can also act your way into new ways of thinking. And that can be a real freedom.
After we have a few questions, I'm going to come back and ask each of you to sum up and hope that you will sort of focus on violence in the society today. Where have all the flowers gone? What's happened to the movement? Who the victims of discrimination are today? And perhaps just a word about the continuing need for us to tear down barriers that separate people of color from those who discriminate. So that's the first question right there. You want to identify yourself?
Rip was on the freedom. Rip was on the freedom.
Everybody knows Rip Patton here who's on this panel.
I had the pleasure of asking one of the panelists.
That's Mike.
Thank you. Last night I had the pleasure of asking one of the panelists the $64,000 question. And I want the panel to think of divine intervention. Last evening, I asked C.T. Vivian, what was your agenda before coming to Nashville? Because I know that John Lewis did not plan to come to Nashville. He was going to school somewhere else, but he ended up in Nashville. And Jim Lawson on yesterday said that there was a small group of 5 or 6 people that formed the committee for the Nonviolent Committee. But they came from different parts of the United States, and they all got together. So I'm going to start at this end because I've heard your version, and starting with Bernard.
What? I'm so sorry. The delegation was leaving, and I wanted to wave to them. Okay. Those been with them for the last couple of days. Yeah. Okay. So that question had to do with coming to Nashville. Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
The divine intervention part.
I had a 4-year scholarship in journalism at Florida A&M University because I was I don't think, maybe John does know this, but I used to be the editor of our school newspaper in high school and was very excited about journalism. And our paper won first prize in the whole state of Florida. First prize. And along with that came a 4-year scholarship for the editor of the newspaper. So I never could bring myself to write the letter to accept this, because obviously the Lord had something else in mind. And, you know, like 3 weeks before school was about to start, we started scurrying around trying to get me in school, and played around all the summer. And, you know, we, Tuskegee University, it was too late. They tried Talladega, it was too late. All those places. So the only place that hadn't started, so that's a good reason to always start a little bit later, Forrest. That was the only place left. So they put me on a train and sent me to this unaccredited, okay? You know, Bible college. It wasn't a Bible college. Theological seminary. It wasn't even.
It had 2 levels.
Right. So because the idea was I was going to be called to preach. My grandmother told me that. So I had to get prepared. And so they had to send me off to school for preachers. You know, so that's how I came to Nashville, you know.
John?
Rip, let me tell you, I think there's something called fate and history. You can call it the spirit of history or faith, or whatever, coming together, whatever you may call it. I wanted to attend Troy State College. It is now known as Troy State University, about 10 miles from my home. When I finished high school in May of 1957 at the age of 17, I applied to go there. I never heard a word from the school. So I wrote a letter to Dr. King and told him about my desire to attend Troy State. Dr. King wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket and invited me to come to Montgomery. In the meantime, my mother, who was working as a laundress at the Southern Baptist Orphan Home in the little town of Troy, came across the Southern Baptist Mission paper, the state convention. And she brought it home, and it says something about American Baptist Theological Seminary, supported jointly by the Southern Baptist and the National Baptist. And that if you go there, you can work your way through school, you don't have to pay tuition. So I applied, and I got a job as a janitor. Not first as working in the kitchen. CT, you may remember, Bernard, those big pots and pans. I only weighed about 100 and maybe 30 pounds. And these big pots and pans, they get so dirty and so much water, and I was struggling to pick them up. So I did that. And in Nashville, I was in Nashville, someone informed Dr. King, because I had told one of the teachers that I was in Nashville, that I had been in contact with Dr. King. One of the teachers told Martin Luther King that I was in Nashville. So Dr. King suggested when I was home for spring break to come and see him. In March of 1958, on a Saturday morning, by this time I'm 18 years old, my father drove me to the Greyhound. I traveled 50 miles from Troy to Montgomery, and arrived in downtown Montgomery, and a young lawyer by the name of Fred Gray, who had been a lawyer for Rosa Parks, and Dr. King met me at the Greyhound bus station and drove me to the First Baptist Church, pastored by Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and ushered me into the pastor's study. And I saw Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy standing behind a desk. I was so scared. I didn't know what I was going to say. And Dr. King said something like, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" And I spoke up and said, "Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis." I gave my whole name. I wanted him to be sure that I was the right person. And so I went back home that afternoon and had a discussion with my mother and father, my sister and brother. They said, "No way," because they owned their own farm. And they were so afraid. So I continued to study at American Baptist. And I think it was the best thing to happen. I was coming to study religion and philosophy. I wanted to be a minister. Some of you heard me say earlier today at the church, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a minister, so much so I started preaching to the chickens. That's right. And, so anyway, this movement became my calling and my mission. And I'm so happy that it worked out this way.
Diane?
Well, I came to be a student at Fisk. I was an English major and an education minor, and I wanted to be a high school teacher, I thought. But, you know, that's why I came to Fisk. And then the fact that Meharry was across the street, and there'd be a lot of good-looking guys who were going to be doctors, helped.
No, you're sure.
Tim?
Martin King and I shook hands the first time February the 6th, 1957 in Oberlin, Ohio. And I won't go through the whole story, but we greeted each other and were able to sit down at a table and talk for a number of minutes. And he learned I had just come back from India, that I realized that nonviolence could be used in the United States effectively, and that I thought in college that one day I would probably go south and work in the South where the segregation issue was so visible and problematic. And so he quietly said, "Don't wait, come now." And I heard myself saying, "I'll come as soon as I can." And I thought then that I would probably go to Atlanta, where he came from and where he was raised, as that city for advancement. But as I took the job as Southern Secretary for the Fellowship of Reconciliation, which was a troubleshooting job, this meant I got to visit many of the crisis areas across the South in 58, 59, doing workshops. I had the pleasure of meeting the Little Rock Nine and rehearsing how they could fight back in the schools where they'd been told not to fight back. And I helped them to see the possibilities of fighting back out of Christian faith and out of nonviolent resistance. So I took that job, and then my immediate supervisor, Glenn Smiley, also a United Methodist minister who I knew about, as we got to talking about my move and where I would move, and I said, well, I thought I'd go to Atlanta. Glenn is the one who said, I recommend strongly that you move to Nashville. I knew a little bit about Nashville. I'd been here for meetings on a couple occasions, and so I agreed. And I do believe that the word you're looking for, Rick Patton, is the old word that the old folks used to use, but it used in the church, providential.
That's it.
Meaning that there is some kind of mystery how we make decisions. It's not all up to us, it's hidden. There are all kinds of folk and things that operate, and it was providential because two reasons. Number one, what Kelly Miller Smith and the Nashville Christian Leadership Council wanted to do in Nashville, establishmentarian leadership in Atlanta, Georgia, had no interest in it whatsoever. And it would have been a disaster.
That's right.
And then the second reason is because Nashville had this coming together, all of you, all of us,
that's right,
which was extraordinary.
That's right.
I mean, none of us could have planned this.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
and
right.
The fact, therefore, that we produced, we saw coming out of this movement then the leadership for the 60s in Albany and Birmingham and Selma and Mississippi Summer and Memphis and Danville and Chicago and I don't know how many other places in the world, in the country.
South Africa.
And since then, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, we could not have planned all of that. Mm-hmm. We could not have even imagined it.
Nashville was really the pace setter city.
Oh, yes. That's
for
right.
the Southern movement.
That's right.
And we were the first that desegregated the lunch counters.
Yes. And the theaters.
Pardon? And the theaters, yes. But by the time the conference occurred over the Easter weekend in 1960, where student leadership from the southern cities where sit-ins were occurring, Nashville had already been successful at desegregating, so other people use the same method.
I should just add an important chapter in the story. It had not to do with how Jim Lawson came to Nashville, but how he went to Boston. And that came about, as many of you know, because as a divinity school student at Vanderbilt, he was also the leader and guidance counselor for these young students who turned the city upside down. And for that, he was expelled from Vanderbilt Divinity School, and that part of the story should not go untold here. It created havoc in the divinity school among its faculty members. The board was very hard-nosed and very unyielding until they realized what trouble they'd gotten into, and before they could reverse themselves, Jim had accepted another opportunity to graduate from Boston University, and he went off. And how did...
I hope that Everett Tilson is here, because Everett Tilson knows more about that story and its effect on the entire Christian church, right? Because when Jim was removed from Vanderbilt, or whatever word one chooses, right? And he decides to go to Boston. And the president of that school was as I say, he wrote my text for the course on Jesus. That's how Branscombe. That's how well he was known, right? And every theologian in the country turned on him, all right? And on Vanderbilt. Because he was wrong. He was going for Christ. He was going for culture instead of for Christ, right? And Jim, and that story and how it was used one way or the other, and people trying to stand up for it and people against it, was a major factor in the Christian church. And Tilson knows that very, very well. Now, I'll tell you my story. He knows my story because we spent a half hour doing it, but we only got 25 minutes now. No, I'm going to sketch it quickly, all right? Don't believe a preacher when he says
this is going to be a
is that first, I got the call to the ministry, and it was a dramatic call. Like I didn't really believe in, right? I really didn't believe in too dramatic calls, right? But it happened to me. You believe in it after it happens to you, right? Is that shortly after that, just to make it quick, is that people were raising money for my going to seminary, and I didn't even know they were. They were raising money for me to go to seminary, and I thought I was going to Colgate Rochester, because I'd been one of those hot 100 picked out when I came out of college to go up, and they pay your way, they wine you and dine you. Well, they don't wine you there, but they dine you because they want you to come to their seminary. That's where I wanted to go. That was my idea of a seminary. I had never heard of ABT, all right? But I believed in God's will. And if that's where they wanted to send me, I would, all right? I came to ABT and found it was the right place. God works in mysterious ways, his wonders perform, and we don't always know what the heck we should be doing, right? All right? And then coming to ABT, we all were arriving at the same time, right? I came in January, by the way, right?
In January what?
I never remember years. My wife would tell you. I never remember years, but we all came about the same time, right? Is that...
C.G., I think you came a little before we did.
Is that right?
Yeah, because you had already become pastor of the community church.
No, I hadn't. No, I hadn't. I came later.
Church, I don't remember you at ABT.
See, Bevel was here, I know, at the time, right? Because we met in the washroom, right?
Yeah.
Is that, and Bevel told me that he was from Cleveland.
Yeah.
I thought he meant Ohio. He meant Cleveland, Mississippi, right? but his family spent a lot of time here, so he was joking because he was from both. But is that the whole thing is about God, just to make it short, right? Is that when I came here to Nashville, right, is that I got, at the end of that first semester, my wife said she was coming down. And I said, to stay for the weekend. She said, no, I'm coming. I said, baby, you're the only one who's got a job. Here I am, standing in the hallway of the dormitory, using the phone, because we didn't have them in the room, right? And here I am, and she's telling me she's coming with the children. Now, I'm saying, well, baby, she said, oh, I'm coming. But she'd already told me that she'd already had me threaten my faith because she said we're having a child at the same time I was about to tell her that very evening that I had been called to the ministry and was going to seminary. She told me she was going to have the child. So I said, I'm not going. And she said, whose faith is in question now? And so the point being is that I came on down, right? When she starts to come, is that within the month when she calls me and school was out, I had a married student's dorm, only one open, and I got it, right? Is that I had been in journalism. I had even tried to own a newspaper. That was a short turn, but I had done everything in journalism. Really, I loved it, right? And I was a religious, and so when I got here, I became a religious journalist, and got the job at the publishing house, right? Is that in that month, everything was go. Is that the Lord works, and I'm clear on that pattern, right? And that this was no accident. And let me give it to you another way. What really happened for this to be here? Remember, there was 14 to 16 religious publishing houses here, right? This is called the of the South, all right?
Buckle on the Bible Belt.
Buckle on the Bible Belt, right? Yeah. Now, the point being is this was the place to have the engagement. The engagement, and it's right because Black Baptists dominate the black community and white Baptists dominate the white community, right? This was a conflict theologically, right? Who's right and who's wrong, right? Is that, and the ultimate piece of the civil rights movement when we proved who God was. Huh? Is God a God of segregation and separation and hate and limiting people's lives? Or is God a God of love and truth and justice and the fulfillment of his creation? That's what we were fighting about. And white Baptists represented one side of it. We represent the other. And it was about finally coming to the thing that's important, because underneath all law is religion. What do you believe is more important than what you write, right? And ultimately that was the factor. We reached the conscience of America. And in reaching the conscience of America, we solved the basic problem that was separating, and we're still solving it. It was just 5 years ago that finally the Southern Baptist Convention apologized. But I tell you what, they apologized.
Better had they not.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But well, see, that's the point, though. See, they apologized, but that was a greater thing than a number of the organizations and denominations that had never apologized. See, apology coming from a white man in the South to black people is a spiritual act in itself, right? Because you've got to say my daddy was wrong, my granddaddy was wrong, my great-granddaddy was wrong. That's meaningful in the South. That may not be meaningful. Now let's get the other piece. Let's get the other piece. Let's get the other piece. But it's got to be followed up with action. And that's what we have not got. But when we talk about reparations, they should be involved in that heavy. All right? Heavy.
John,
Jim
and then Bernard. I'd like to mention some lessons. Okay. Because this opportunity will pass by. Lessons that we learned. Number one, I learned from Diane that it's possible to get consensus even when you have a lot of strong egotistical men who were heads of fraternities and heads of student bodies and all that sort of business. That was one thing that was possible, to get a consensus. So it wasn't like one leader. Okay, Diane was a spokesperson because she was more articulate, and also because she was a consensus maker. She would give a fair hearing to everyone and give people a chance to come to some conclusion. She would really articulate and restate what we've been saying better than we did. So therefore, that consensus making, even though she didn't come from a Quaker background, was very critical. I don't know where she learned that from. It might be important to find out. The next thing was that from Jim Lawson, the lesson was this. Once we had the economic boycott and the sit-ins, okay, withdrawal, what it meant was this: we have to first examine how we participate in our own oppression. We were buying at all those other stores. So the idea and the motive was not to hit the merchants on the head, okay, with an economic boycott. It was to recognize our own participation in an unjust system and simply to withdraw our participation. That's different from a labor union strike or a boycott or whatever. We're not trying to bring them to their knees because of economics. We are recognizing something in ourselves, that we have to get ourselves right, okay, before we can have the moral fiber, okay, and the moral strength to ask other people to change, because we contribute to the problem ourselves. Okay, that's lesson 2. The next one I learned from Jim is that simply because we had the advantage, and we did have it, because about the second week it was 98% effective in terms of blacks shopping downtown. It was a ghost town. I said, okay, now that we got them to agree to desegregate the lunch counters, rather than go through all this again, let's put into the demands the restaurants. Then we could be through with this thing. And Jim said, no. He said, our demands were lunch counters. I said, well, look, let's get them while we got them over the barrel. No, he said, we have to give them a chance to make a decision about that, and some did. Because you don't just take advantage because you have the power. Because the goal was not to desegregate the lunch counters. The goal was to make a moral victory and get people to come to a new reality, because they had to be part of building this beloved community. So it wasn't the idea of beating them into submission. It was striking their conscience for the purpose of getting them to the position where they could grow and become partners with us. Like, for example, it was a manager at Harvey's department store who came to us one time in negotiations, who said that he was going to desegregate his counters. And you know what our position was? No, you can't do that. We're telling this big man who is the manager of the store, big down thing, that he can't desegregate his lunch counter. We said, no, what we want you to do is go back to the squash court, tennis court, golf club, or wherever y'all talk with the Chamber of Commerce folks and work on them. In the meantime, we're going to intensify the sit-ins. Okay? So, see, the goal was to win people over. If we just simply stop with trying to desegregate some lunch counters and stuff, we can just go one by one all those years. No. You win people over and they become partners with you in bringing about the change. So it's that dialogue and understanding and allowing other people to come forward. And that's the business that Jim was talking about earlier, about, it's called compromise. Okay? And we have to learn how to compromise in terms of the, not just saying we're going to rush downtown and we're going to all sit in because they've decided. Well, we go one by one. It was not testing the principle. It was simply giving people an opportunity to visually see black people eating downtown so they wouldn't panic. We have to be concerned about our opponents, because you know why? We made our adversaries our allies. And that was the lesson, that we learned. How do you do that? All right? You have to be patient and loving with people. And you have to also compromise. Give people a chance to also grow while we grow.